What in your life led you to meeting him?
We were just waiting. When somebody saw the Messiah coming, they let my brother know, and my brother came and got me right away.
Where did you meet him?
My brother came and got me right away. He was staying at a house in Capernaum.
What was your first impression of him?
I'm going to be pretty honest. It was insane. I was meeting the Messiah, the one who we've been waiting for. And also, he told me to go by a new name. Who meets somebody and the first impression is to go by a different name?
What did you talk about?
The first time, not a whole lot, other than him telling me to go by a new name. The second time was completely different. Nets were exploding with fish. Fish were coming out of the water, jumping into the boat. In that moment, I knew that I was in the presence of the Messiah. He told me that I'd be a fisher of men, and I'm still trying to figure what that means.
How did your life change after meeting him?
It'll never be the same. We left everything that we had to follow him. Our family, our boats and our nets, our plans. He was completely worth it.
Would you change anything about your encounter with Jesus?
Absolutely not. I can't say that I understood everything that he did or said, but he's the Messiah. My life will absolutely never be the same.
Well, good morning. Good morning. We'll hang out in the dark for a second. Just kidding. How's everybody doing? Good. Man, I think these interview videos have been so fun, so I hope that you're enjoying them as well. Oh, man. All right, so we're continuing our journey to the table this week as we talk about Peter. It's kind of funny watching this because I wrote the answers, but I'm a girl, so then watching a boy say them was just really funny for some reason. So it's just really cool. This has been really fun. Good job, media team. You guys rock. Sorry, my pages flipped this morning. So today we're going to talk about Peter. And Peter is one of my favorite guys in the Bible. I think for the sake of time, we could probably spend months and months talking about Peter and Jesus and their relationship. So we're going to keep it brief this morning. But I just wanted to give you a few quick facts about Peter. And so we all know this. Miriam's a Bible nerd, so bear with me. So first things first, Peter was married, and his wife was actually a follower of Jesus as well, which I just thought was really cool. We don't hear that many mentions of the spouses of the disciples. So hey, his wife traveled with them and got to spend time with Jesus as well, which was really cool. The second thing is that he was not trained as a rabbi. And he also had a Galilean accent, which comes up later in the story of Jesus. But and according to this People of the Bible book, he was known as ignorant and unlearned, which that's a fun thing to be known as. Also, Peter headed up the list of disciples in almost every list in the New Testament, not because he was called first, but because he ended up really standing out as the leader of the disciples. One thing that's really cool about Peter, which I really appreciate, was his honesty in admitting his ignorance and his own sinfulness. And he asked a lot of questions, which how many, I don't know, sometimes we're scared to ask questions. As believers, we're I don't want to look stupid, I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm talking about. But he was totally fine with asking questions. And to have Jesus as your primary resource sitting in the room with you, how cool would that have been to get to ask questions of him? A couple other things. This is just, I love building the full picture of who he was. Another thing that was really cool was that, one, he was present at the Transfiguration. He heard the voice of God endorsing Jesus. He was the first of the disciples to confess that Jesus was the Messiah, which is really cool. And I love, this book said specifically that this truth was not arrived at by deduction or through any human agency, but as a result of revelation from God the Father. It was God-given revelation that he realized who Jesus was. How cool is that? And so we're going to jump into his life. I did want to share something really quickly just before really jumping into this because a lot of Peter's story, I love one of the things that I read about him was that this was the ultimate story of Jesus turning a lump of clay into a rock. Just putting that really Peter's story so simply, but as we were singing this last song, I'm a big fan of a metaphor, y'all, so you gotta roll with me. But just thinking about this idea of a lump of clay, and I just felt like God put on my heart that it's important for us to understand that. So like clay, a potter makes a thing and then they have to put it in the kiln for it to be usable for any of its purposes. But I felt like God wanted someone in here to know this morning that it is once you put the clay in the fire that you can see the inconsistencies. You can see anything that's cracked. Like those things happen in the fire on the other side. But that we would be reminded this morning that God doesn't throw out the stuff with cracks. Okay? He rebuilds us, he breaks us down, and he makes us more and more in his image every time. And you can remake a piece of pottery as many times as you want. Like, dump some water on it, smooth it out, and keep rolling. Like, God he loves us so much that he doesn't throw us in a trash can when he finds inconsistencies in us. He doesn't throw us in a trash can when we make a misstep. He lovingly takes us and recarves us into what he wants us to be. So just please be encouraged by that this morning. Gosh, he's just so good. He loves us so much. And I feel like in the story of Peter, like we see that so much. I was really convicted actually reading this. There's one quote I want to find specifically. I think I actually put it at the end of this. Where was it? Oh, actually, I don't think I put it in here. But this guy I was talking about, this book called, it's called Life Sentences, and it was about all these different people in the Bible. But he specifically says, and we're going to talk about this a little bit today, but specifically with Jesus changing Peter's name. So let's just start there. Does that sound good? So everybody, if you can flip to John 1 with me. This is Peter's first interaction with Jesus. And as we're talking about this today, so we're going to look at 4 of Peter's first interactions with Jesus. And I think we all know that, like, Peter was the unwieldy guy who cut off the guy's ear. He was the guy who denied Jesus. But I think it's really important also that we look at his first interactions with Jesus. Because I really believe, and I think that we'll see today, that every interaction that he had with Jesus, every interaction we have with Jesus builds upon the ones before. And that's what's so cool, like, about walking with Jesus is there isn't any, like, there's continuation all the time. Even if there's like I tripped off the path for that second, but there is continuation in that path that we get to walk with him, and he builds upon what he teaches us. And I mean, who can say with me, he builds upon the mistakes we make too. So just saying, we are blessed to get to continue on this path and not get thrown to the wayside. So the 3 things that I want us to think about today while we're looking at these interactions is, what can we learn from Peter's actions? What do these passages say about Jesus? And then how can we apply those to our lives? So we're going to look at 4 specific interactions, but just keep those questions in mind. I think really as we read the word as a whole, what can we learn from the actions of the people we're reading about? God didn't put them in there on accident. And obviously Jesus is the thread that runs through the whole Bible. So just really taking the time to kind of piece those things together, I think, can grow us a lot. I love another one of these quotes just said that each of these experiences of Peter and his friends helped them know Jesus better. And when we know Jesus better, we trust him more. When we know Jesus better, we love him more. We love other people more. And the more that our relationship with him increases. So, y'all ready for this journey together? Okay, so the first section that we're looking at, so this is John 1. We're going to look at verses 35 through 42. And I'm reading out of the New Living Translation today. So it says, "The following day, John was again standing with 2 of his disciples. As Jesus walked by, John looked at him and declared, 'Look, there is the Lamb of God.' When John's 2 disciples heard this, they followed Jesus. Jesus looked around and saw them following. 'What do you want?' he asked them. They replied, 'Rabbi,' which means teacher. 'Where are you staying?' 'Come and see,' he said. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they went with him to the place where he was staying, and they remained with him the rest of the day. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of these men who heard what John said and then followed Jesus. Andrew went to find his brother Simon and told him, 'We have found the Messiah,' which means Christ. Then Andrew brought Simon to meet Jesus. Looking intently at Simon, Jesus said, 'Your name is Simon, son of John, but you will be called Cephas,' which means Peter." Super cool first interaction. I mean, Can you imagine being like, oh yeah, so I'm gonna call you this instead? Like, in a kind way. Like, Jesus wasn't like being sarcastic, like, let me give you a weird nickname. Like, he was sincerely changing the trajectory of Peter's life. So the first thing we want to look at in this section, Peter was surrounded by people who were looking for the Messiah. His brother was a disciple of John the Baptist, and what's really cool about the context of all of this is John had just baptized Jesus, like right before this section. So John was preparing the way for years, and he had just had this awesome interaction with Jesus. But his brother Andrew, so Andrew, Peter's brother, sought him out to come meet the Messiah. Are we surrounding ourselves with people who are poised and ready on the lookout for Jesus? That's who he lived his life with. The other thing about this section is that Jesus first called Peter by his identity, not by maybe what other people saw him to be. He called him by what Jesus saw for him to be. So a rock, his name. So first, his name Simon actually means hearer, which is kind of cool. Hadn't looked that up before. Means hear or to listen, which is super cool. But we know that the Bible says, hey, don't just hear, go do the things, right? So Jesus is calling Peter into this other role. He was calling him to be and to do more as he was changing his name in this moment. And something God really convicted me about as I was reading this is so often we call people by their mistakes or negative traits. We call Thomas the doubter. Peter was the guy with the big mouth. Like, those are the things that we call them. But we would shudder at the thought of somebody doing that to me. Like, wouldn't you be offended? Like, oh, Miriam, the people pleaser over there. Like, how I would be like, okay, we're not going to be friends anymore. Like, that's not how we interact with people. And God just so convicted me. Like, he is doing something more and something greater than the people that you're around. It is not like Jesus to say, hey, oh, that's the liar. Oh, that's the, like, instigator, whatever. It is so, and if we look at the people of the Bible, we can do the same thing. And these are people that God didn't put here by accident. God didn't put us here by accident. As we look at leaders, Christian leaders, non-Christian, anybody that we come in interaction with, to choose to highlight the negative instead of calling out what we know God has placed in them, puts us in a position that is the opposite of Jesus.
That's right.
First and foremost, he calls us to be his. So I'm gonna walk around and be like, Caleb, the child of God, Summer, the child of God. Like, even if that's my starting point, like, relationship builds on the things that you know about people. So I can say, Caleb is the awesome leader. Summer is an amazing leader. She's a great wife. Like, you know all these things, and then you get to call those things out in people. And that is why relationship matters. That is what Jesus was walking in with Peter. He wasn't just calling him a random name. He was calling out things in him. I love also Jesus, it says, Jesus looked intently at Simon before renaming him. It says in the Message that he took one look at him and changed his name. It says in the Passion that Jesus prophesied after gazing upon him. Would our hearts be that we could look at people and say, I see what God's doing. I see what God's calling you to. I see because I love you, because he loves us, that we get to then, that gets to be our lens that we work through. I mean, we were talking about a guy, y'all, that, like, he was known as being uneducated and known as not being a rabbi, which, like, as a Jewish person at the time, like, that would be like, oh, you're not a rabbi, so I don't know if I want to listen to what you have to say. Like, that was the kind of dynamic we were working in. Like, hey, you're not a pastor, why would I listen to you? Like, we can't do that. Jesus called this man. He was a guy who knew a guy who met Jesus, and he got to come be a part of that. Like, and in that moment, Jesus knew what he was being called to. Jesus' first interaction with Peter did not include a name change by accident. There was intentionality in calling him to something more than he was known to be. Every interaction with Jesus was a building block on the one before. Every single one. I love reading the Gospels. It was funny, like, researching this, because I had to go look up, like, okay, because, you know, the Gospels are, like, syncopated. They're kind of a little bit out of order, and then you kind of have to figure out where things go in the actual timeline. And so it was cool reading this, knowing that, like, that was the first interaction. Like, Jesus said, hey, your name's Peter. Let's go hang out together. And, like, that was MC. Like, that's all that we get of that first interaction. And so the second interaction happens in Mark 1, 16 through 20. It's also, for your Bible nerd notes like me, it's also Matthew 4, 18 and 19. It's, like, almost exactly word for word, which is super cool. So I'm going to let y'all get there for a second. So this is Mark 1, it's 16 through 20. It says, one day as Jesus was walking along the shore of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called to them and said, "Follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed him. A little farther up the shore, Jesus saw Zebedee's sons, James and John, in a boat repairing their nets. He called them at once, and they also followed him, leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men. So this is just so cool to me because Peter, James, and John were like Jesus' three amigos. That's a cheesy title for them. But like they were the three guys that like really spent the most intentional time with him. And I think what's cool about this is that like we'd already seen relationship be established after this first interaction. And some of the things I was reading were saying that like that first interaction was like a brief moment. Like they hung out for a day. It could have been weeks and even months before the second interaction happened. But relationship had already been established between Jesus and these men. It wasn't like, hey, yo, like, I don't know you, but you want to come, like, do this thing? Which I just think is cool. Like, the building block of relationship that Jesus uses is no conversation in this Bible is without relationship. And I love also that we see this transition from here's your job to here's your calling. Your job is to fish for fish in the ocean. But what I'm calling you to is to fish for people, is to go spread the message, is to go stretch those nets far and wide. And I just want to say here, all of these things happened in preparation of what was to come. Don't discount the things that we view as small moments with Jesus. Right. I think sometimes we want to have the moment of the dove coming down and landing on my shoulder, and only then will everyone know that Jesus has called me. But people can know that Jesus called me because I stopped and helped someone in the grocery store, or because I showed up and helped my friend move. Like these little things, I think so often we get so caught up in like the big and the bold, and we can't discount these little moments one by one. I mean, can you imagine like this interaction probably was like 15 seconds long, like this brief moment of calling, and then their relationship was built from there. So that's number 2. So number 3 so we're going to look at Luke 4, verses 38 and 39. It also happens in Mark chapter 1, so it's kind of a continuation again. Again, y'all, relationship is the thread here, which is so cool. So Jesus had spent the day, he'd been at the synagogue with James and John. Like I said, they were building this, he was building his disciples in this time. So Luke 4, 38 and 39 says, after leaving the synagogue that day with James and John, Jesus went to Simon's home, where he found Simon's mother-in-law very sick with a high fever. Please heal her, everyone begged. Standing at her bedside, he rebuked the fever and it left her. She got up at once and prepared a meal for them. And I just want to read it in Mark as well. Mark gives a couple more details really quickly. So it says, after Jesus left the synagogue with James and John, they went to Simon and Andrew's home. Now Simon's mother-in-law was sick in bed with a high fever. They told Jesus about her right away. So he went to her bedside, took her by the hand, helped her sit up, and then the fever left her, and she prepared a meal for them. Again, relationship was built. This guy, who is the Messiah, they invited him into his home. Like, can y'all imagine, like, okay, how do I clean my house to an appropriate degree for the Messiah to come and sit at my table? Like, I mean, it's enough to be like, okay, I have friends coming over, I need to, like, step my game up, like, things like that. But to know, hey, come into our home. And not just, like, come into our home and, like, I don't know, like, they weren't putting on this show for Jesus. They were inviting him into the not fun part of their life, too. They were inviting him in saying, hey, like, my mom-in-law is sick. Like, we need your help. And, I think what was also so cool about this section is that, like, there were people there contending. They were like, Jesus, we need you. Like, it wasn't just Peter who was like, hey, Jesus, can you come help me out? It was like, hey, Jesus, like, we need you. We cannot do anything about this. Surround yourself with people who are contending for you, who are contending for your healing, who are contending for Jesus to move in your life. And do the same. It is not fair for us to sit around and wait for people to contend for us and never to contend for anybody else. That's selfish. It is important that we are on the offense and on the defense, that we are fighting for the people that are in our lives, the people that are around us. and surround yourself with people who seek Jesus on your behalf. And I love that it wasn't like she just like sat up and was like, okay, I need a couple days to recover. Like she sat up and she went and made dinner. Like that's amazing that Jesus is so good. She got up at once. And I think what's so cool here is that I think a lot of times, and we do this as people, we do this as believers, both ways, that we put ourselves in a place that friendship is transactional. That it's like, oh, like, will you pick me up from the airport so I guess I can babysit for you? Or like, oh, like, thank you for helping me cut my lawn, so I guess now that you did that, I have to do blah, blah, blah. But I love that Jesus didn't act from a transactional place. Jesus was relational. He didn't say, oh, hey, Peter, because you dropped your net, I suppose I can heal your mom. Like, that was not how this works. But he was building this from a place of relationship. Jesus was like, I'm here. She needs healing. Let's make it happen. Like, the end. And guys, like, there's so much power in showing up. Like, not just, Jesus is always here. He doesn't, like, he's here. His presence is here. There's so much power in us showing up, whether it's showing up to his presence, showing up at my friend's house, showing up to serve someone. Like, the power of showing up is the essence of relationship. We can't build relationship if we never see each other, or if we never pick up the phone, or any of those things. Jesus built these disciples. He built everything out of relationship, which is like, I don't know, it's one of those things where you could like slap it on a big board, but then you need like 8 million bullet points underneath to like describe all of the parts of relationship. But knowing that one simple thing, that if we build the blocks, let me reword. Our building blocks of our relationship with Jesus is the foundation of our relationship with others. So if we are leaving those to crumble, if you don't put the mortar in between the bricks, like it literally will topple. Like the house that we're building will topple. And so we can't build the walls of relationship. We can't build the walls of family if we don't have that foundation of our relationship with Jesus. Going and showing up in his presence. It's all the difference. Makes all the difference. So interaction number 4. So this is our last one. We got some other stuff to talk about, so don't worry. I have more time to fill because I have to go 5 minutes longer than last week. So, okay. So our 4th interaction we're going to look at is Luke 5. So this is Luke 5 verses 1 through 11. Which I just like really encourage you. It's really fun like reading through all the gospels like separately, but then like in a row. So you can kind of see like the threads that go through all of them. It's just fun. And also like you're looking at 4 people who walk with Jesus and their perspective, which I just think is cool. Like, I don't know, we have a really cool opportunity to live in this time to get to see all this stuff. Okay, so Luke 5, 1 through 11. So it says, one day, as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. He noticed 2 empty boats on the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked Simon, its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish." "Master," Simon replied, "we worked hard all night last night and didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let the nets down again." And this time their nets were so full of fish they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "O Lord, please leave me. I am such a sinful man." For he was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you'll be fishing for people." And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. How cool, y'all. I mean, exploding fishing nets, that's pretty awesome. So I love this. So we get these similar interactions in Matthew and Mark, but we get a very expanded look at this interaction here. So here's what we see, and I thought this was so cool reading this through. Again, is that not only does Jesus give them direction, but he literally tells them where to let their nets down. And I think that's something that I know in my life, I'm not always patient enough to wait on Jesus to tell me the where, or the who, or the why, or the when. sometimes I'm like, okay, like, I know you told me to do the thing, like, I need some details now, please. And I think it's just, we get this picture of like, are you sure that's what you want us to do? But then Simon Peter goes ahead and does what he says. And I think what's also really interesting about this section is that Jesus was stretching Peter in an area he was very familiar with. Like, fishing was the name of his game. Like, all day, all night, like, that is what he did for his job. And God just, gosh, he just teaches us sometimes, you know, like, we know the stories and then we read the stories again, and you're like, oh, I missed that before. How often do we think we know so much that God can't show us anything new?
That's right. Yeah.
Like, I mean, for a lot of us, like, we've been doing this church thing a long time. Like, I mean, I am in the middle of the group, but like, we've been doing this church thing a long time. I think sometimes we're like, oh no, like, we've got this figured out. Like, there's nothing else God can teach us about how to run a life group or how to do a worship team, or like, there's nothing else he's got. And oh my gosh, he has something else. If he can teach us something new about fishing, he can teach us something new about every single other thing in our lives. So we see Jesus give the what and the where right before this miracle happens. And then we see obedience in where to cast. Peter wasn't like, hey, like, we already tried this, so like, what if I tried over here? Like, no, he said, you know what, Jesus, you said it, I'm going to do it. And then he got to see the fruitfulness of that. He didn't challenge Jesus, he trusted his word in that moment. And I know for me, like, I'm consistently learning, like, hey, Jesus, let's try it another way, usually doesn't work out as well as it could, because, I mean, Miriam's capacity is so small compared to the capacity of our God that we serve, who's amazing and indescribable and, like, so far beyond what any of us can understand. He encouraged obedience in this moment to cast where and when he said to, and then they got to see the fruitfulness of that. Let God challenge us in what we think we already know. So I think it is really easy for us to get stuck. And if our hearts, I tell people all the time, I'm a very leaky person. Like, I'm usually crying. Like, in worship, in life, in conversations, at the dinner table, like, whenever. I'm usually crying. So, like, you'll notice, trust me. But I think just learning, somebody told me once, like, there's not something wrong with having a soft heart. And I think in these moments of knowing that, like, hey, Jesus, like, I want to have a soft heart in my job. I want to have a soft heart with my husband. I want to have a soft heart with my friends. Being willing to let God keep teaching us things, even in areas that we feel like we've got pretty figured out. I think I find that a lot of times those are the times that Jesus is like, so let's look at it this way. Or like, hey, let me change your perspective a little bit. Or hey, let me bring a new person into your already well-established bubble and let's see what we can learn out of that. And just not being, I think Peter could have pitched a fit. Like, he totally could have been like, really, dude? Like, I just fished all night. I'm going to go home and take a nap. And instead, he went and put his net in the water. And that's convicting me. Fun story. The other morning, I was like, oh yeah, I need to get up and like, for details. My husband's waking up at 4 a.m. right now to go to work. It's a fun overtime schedule. But the other morning, I was like, oh yeah, like I should just stay awake when he leaves and spend some time in the Word. And then I decided I would go back to sleep instead. And not 15 minutes later, I got a call from my husband and he hit a deer on the way to work. He's fine, car's fine, everything's fine. But I was like, I know, I do not believe that Jesus sets us up for disaster. But it just was a moment of like, I should not have gone back to sleep. Like, I should have stayed awake and been, because then I get a phone call and I'm like not coherent. I was like, what happened? Half asleep. So it's just these funny moments of like, man, like, how many moments have I pitched a fit or decided to do something my way instead of giving space for Jesus to teach me in that moment? Because we see the fruitfulness right here of obedience, and that's just really awesome. So these are the first 4 interactions that Peter has with Jesus, and we go on to see he's there when Jairus' daughter is healed. He's there at the Transfiguration. He's there in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's in all these places, and I wanted to share this quote with you guys because I thought it was so good. This again is from that book, Life Sentences by Warren B. Wiersbe. If you need me to write that down for you, let me know. But he says this, and he's talking about the fact that he broke up his like thing about Peter into like, he talked about, I'm getting my sections mixed up. But at this point he was talking about like learning how to love by actions instead of by words, and how that's such a part of, I think, really what all the disciples learned from Jesus. But he says, making a passionate speech and wielding a sword were not valid evidences of Peter's love, but staying awake and praying with and for Jesus would have qualified. The better we know Jesus, the more we trust him. The more we trust him, the more we learn to love him. And in my conviction of not calling Peter like the foot-shaped mouth man, or whatever people want to call him, because he stuck his foot in his mouth so much, realizing that, like, how often are my actions or my words very like passionate and brash, but then I don't couple them with prayerfulness and being awake to the things of God. I even singing Refiner. Refiner is one of these songs over the past year that has like convicted the heck out of me, because I was like, God, like, I am praying a stinking bold prayer. Like, burn me up. Like, burn all the mess in my life up. And we'll see what's left. Like, how often do we volunteer and be like, hey, I would like you to, what's the word I'm thinking of? I'd like constructive criticism here, please. Like, let me stand here. You can all let me know what you think of me, what I need to fix. Like, we don't do that. We don't ask for that in our lives of people. But coming before the Father and saying, hey, God, like, would you work it all out of me? Like, would you burn me up the bridge of burn me beautiful, burn me holy? Like, oh my gosh, the other day I was listening to that song, I was like, God, would you burn me patient? Like, would you burn me compassionate for the people around me? Would you burn me to this place that, like, my character looks so much like you? Would you burn me kind instead of sarcastic or mean? Like, would you just strip all of the things in me that don't look like you? We have such an opportunity, just in this quote, like, the staying awake and the praying with and for Jesus would have qualified as acts of love in those moments. And I read a quote the other day that has also been convicting me a lot, but it said, I wish I had written the guy's name down, but it said Twitter and Facebook are evidence that time is not what keeps us from being prayerful, basically, is what it said. That we choose that. And I think just in studying Peter and in realizing that, like, it wasn't his his ignorance and his question asking, like, honestly, like, have y'all watched The Chosen, anybody? It's an interpretation of the New Testament. It's really good. But they paint Peter like we would paint Peter. He's like a stinker who has an attitude, and he's a goofball, honestly, like, to put it very bluntly. But I just think it's interesting that we have an opportunity to learn from that nonetheless. We have an opportunity to say, hey, God, like, I want to choose staying awake. I want to choose prayerfulness. Because those are the things that, not to say that Peter's passion disqualified him from anything. Like, y'all, we need passionate people in our lives. Like, I will say I'm pretty boring, so, like, find a passionate friend as well. And make sure you fill your lives with all the different types of people. But really taking the opportunity to be prayerful, to be awake to the things that God is doing. Because he's always at work, even when we are sleeping. And please, listen to your body and rest. Do not take what I said as, like, please don't ever sleep and just stay up all night all the time. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Jesus also rested in a boat in a storm. Like, come on. So, what is it that Peter teaches us about Jesus? So his first interaction was brief, but life-changing, down to the name he was called. We can't disregard our brief moments of interacting with Jesus. I think sometimes we need to take the time. Like, taking the time is important, but your 15 minutes isn't disqualified by your 2 hours. You know what I mean? Like, there's importance in every meeting that we have with Jesus. His second and third, in the way I lined them up, but it was incredible. He went from meeting the Messiah and spending an afternoon with him to experiencing the greatness of God. He was awestruck. And to be awestruck to a point of, it wasn't just like, oh my gosh, like, you're awesome. Like, Peter, in that moment, knew his humanity. He knew his lack of being like Jesus. He realized that he was in the presence of the most perfect one. And he fell to his knees and was like, oh my gosh, like, you are here, you are real, and you just did this thing that I could never wrap my head around it. And I love that how these stories are tied together, because Andrew told Peter that Jesus was the Messiah. Like, it was like a verbal, like, hey, we found the Messiah, let's go see him. But in the second interaction, he came face to face with the undeniable truth of who Jesus was. Like, if you were in a boat and your nets were exploding and this guy said to fish there, like, there's no denying who he was interacting with. And I love too that in the third interaction with Jesus, when he healed his mother-in-law, this was a story that cemented for me the relationship between these men, because Peter got to see the power of God move in his home, in his family, in a place that maybe was more private for him. Because it wasn't just like, hey, here's Jesus and his relationship with these guys. It went beyond that in that moment. It was, hey, here's Jesus and his relationship with those guys, and here's the extra layer of their families being a part of that. And then you see the extra layers of the places that they went being added into that as they continued to go share the gospel. So I shared this at the beginning, but there was another one of these quotes that just said, we're nothing but lumps of clay, but Jesus can turn us into rocks. They talked a little bit about, as we're approaching Easter, the moment that Peter did deny Jesus, and it was confirmed that he had done what Jesus said. And I love this book said, it wasn't an angry scowl of a judge, but a pained look of a friend whose heart had just been broken. At that moment, Peter saw himself and realized what he had done to Jesus, and then he went out and wept bitterly. For each of us, there must come an hour of honest confrontation with our true self and humble confession of our sins to the Lord. It's important for us to be like, I am a lump of clay. Like, I understand that I am not a perfectly established, beautiful, pristine marble slab. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a lump of clay. And God is continuously molding me, and I think that in this whole thing with Peter, that's what we get to see. We got to see, hey, here's this lump of clay Peter. It went through the fire, came out with a little inconsistencies. Well, let's go again. Here's this other interaction. Let's go to Jairus' house and see his daughter healed. Go through the fire, come out with something else that needs to be worked on. Like, there's this cycle that we're in with constantly being perfected by the Father. And that's not something that, it's not something that has to scare us or, I'm dead, sorry. It's not something that has to scare us or, I think as believers, sometimes we get a little freaked out, like, oh crap, Jesus wants to work on something else today. Like, we have those moments of, I don't know if I'm ready for that. But there's so much power in us continuing to show up. Like, Peter could have been discouraged after the first time and was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know if I can be this person that he's calling me to be. But he kept showing up. He kept putting his net in the water when Jesus told him to. He kept, and he went on to do so much ministry after Jesus died. I was reading in this book that it was like, it was talking about one of the times he was in jail, and he was like, Peter wasn't worried. Jesus already told him he was going to live a bunch more years and get crucified. Like, he was confident that he was going to get crucified, and because Jesus said so, and he was cool with that. Like, so he just kept on doing ministry. And my encouragement to you today is just that we would be encouraged by all of these people that walked with Jesus. That we would know that Jesus is building on the building blocks of our lives, of the experiences that we have with him, of the experiences that we have with others. And that he is calling us to more than maybe we know right now. I think I go back and forth on like being really interested in like namesakes, and like, so my name's Miriam, so like Miriam, Moses' sister, blah, blah, like we know that. But like Miriam she was a prophetess. She was the leader of the worshipers, and like things like that I had these moments of like, okay, God, these are the things that she was established as in the Bible, but like, God, what are you calling me to as Miriam in 2021 in a totally different time, in a totally different place, but that doesn't change the value of who God called her to be. You have Caleb and Joshua, who like were these brave, amazing men. Caleb is a brave, amazing man. I'm not saying that he's not, but I'm just saying like there are different things that God's called him to. And I think knowing that Jesus built all of these interactions, they were built on relationship. And I encourage you, call, I think I've said this before, maybe as in a devotional or something, but I think so often we complicate calling out the things of God in people. It's so easy to call out the obvious in your friends, because they might not see it. Like, it might be like, Wendy, I can't talk about you because I'll start crying, but Wendy is, I think people, like, you get put in this box of like, hey, Wendy ministers to kids. Wendy ministers to far beyond just children. Like, if you didn't know that. But like, God has called her in the family restoration business and calling those things out of the people that you love. Because sometimes we get so caught up in like, okay, God, well, like, I didn't spend time with you today, and like, obviously that takes me off the list of applicable people to use today. Like, that's not how he works. And so just encourage you, call out the things in your friends that maybe you see as obvious that they maybe haven't thought about for a while, or maybe it's never been called out in them before. But to say, hey, like, listen, I know that this is where you're at. I know that this is how you're feeling, but this is what God's got. Or this is who I see you to be. And more than anything, you're a child of God. Beyond all of those other things. So let's seek him out. Let's encourage the people and build things on relationships. And I don't think I met my time limit. But that we would also just be encouraged by those small moments with Jesus. We just wrapped up this series. It was a life group class called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Super good. If you haven't done it, we're probably going to offer it again, so make sure you tell us if you're interested. But we did, part of the class was you do a workbook, read through this book, but there's this thing called a daily office. And it was just you did 2 minutes of silence and then a brief devotional and prayer time every day, twice a day. And I think something that like I realized in that was like, Jesus doesn't need a certain time limit to make a difference in my day. Like, I gave him 2 minutes of a 1 minute devotional and he spoke to me. Like, how powerful he is that if we will show up and invite him there, that he'll speak. That's right. Because that's how he works, how he loves us. Because he's awesome. The end. So I hope that this has been encouraging to you guys today. I really believe that that we can really change our perspective on how we name people, even how we name the circumstances in our lives. I really, what Pastor Missy said earlier about like calling out the thing that, not highlighting the issue or the problem or the sin issue, but really highlighting who is God. He's the overcomer. He's the provider. He's all of these things in our lives that sometimes we just forget. So here's your reminder. Be reminded in that today, and be willing to be stretched in the areas that you already know. Whether that's your job or your marriage or your relationship with your mom, like whatever it may be, like be stretched in those areas, because I really believe that the Lord can do so much if we just ask him. So yeah. So would y'all stand with me? Can we conclude together?
Thank you for tuning in to this week's message. If you'd like to learn more about Lifehouse Church, you can visit our website, rvalifehouse.org, or our Facebook page @RVA Lifehouse. Tune in next week for more from Lifehouse Church.